And we're live. I'm here with Pete. Pete, how you doing?
Doing well. Let's do this, man.
Oh yeah, well, I'm happy to have you on. Elite Series kind of been, I don't know, it started making the rounds around my circle of the internet probably a few months ago. Probably when AA put out his book, Populist Delusion, which I had you on for, which is a fantastic book. But if anyone doesn't want to read the whole book, this can serve as a very simple introduction. Just kind of get the topics out of the way of the basics of Elite Theory. So first question, Pete, what is Elite Theory?
Well, let's start with what it's not. Okay.
Okay.
Because the term elite's in there, people immediately get ideas about, oh, these are the best you have, or people are looking upon them as like the smartest. These are people, they're like an aristocracy, they're like a nobility.
Mhm.
All elite theory is, the terminology is just describing the fact that wherever you go, no matter what organization, from the government on down to a podcast that has more than one person, elite theory is in play. There will always be a small group or one person who is running things, and you just can't get past that.
That makes sense. I mean, I was thinking of like a local chess club meeting. You have 7, say 12 people show up. Only 3 of them actually want to be in. Making sure the next meeting happens, making sure they have funding for the next meeting. It's always going to be a small number of people who actually care enough about it to make sure it's run properly.
Sure. Or the old Glory Club. We just had our first conference this past weekend, and there's an elite group of us that started it. Within that group, when it came to doing that conference and putting on that conference, there was an elite group inside the elite group that was in charge of that we knew that they were more competent than anyone else to be able to pull this off. And you see that it breaks down into everything.
Okay. Now, in Elite Theory, there's a lot of terms that are thrown around, like iron law of oligarchy, circulation of elites, the high, low, and middle. Let's just kind of go down the list. I'll ask you what is one, and you kind of just give us a little explanation on it. So, what is the iron law of oligarchy?
The iron law of oligarchy is, I will give you an example of it from very recent history. If anybody follows the Libertarian Party, in 2022, a group took over and basically got pretty much every seat and every position because they basically just stormed it, had more people than anyone else, and took over the party. Now people are going to be like, well, wait a minute, that's not elite theory, that's a populism. Yeah, but not everyone who showed up is running the party. Then it breaks down to a couple people. There's your elite theory. But what happens is the iron law of oligarchy, and I was learning about the iron law of oligarchy at the time, and I said, here's what's going to happen. Well, okay, so I was just giving you the definition for iron law of bureaucracy. I'm a retard. The iron law of oligarchy is that whenever you have an organization or you have a group, it's always going to break down into I guess the iron law of oligarchy is a lot similar to the to elite theory, in that once you get to a certain point and you believe, like, let me try another example. Sorry. Let's use the example of the founding of the United States. Founding of the United States was done by an elite group. Okay. And they set it up so that an elite group would always run it. Now, the people have a choice because they get to pick who the elite group is. They get to pick who the leaders are, but they only get to pick leaders from this elite group. You understand what I'm saying? There's always just they don't get to just pick their barber or something like that. Well, what happens eventually there is that, gone unchecked, you're going to develop these oligarchs. You're going to develop these people who get power beyond what they should be allowed to have because of a small group. And what can happen is you people who then you have like lobbying. You have people who come in and say, and give money so that the government can lean one way or another. And we see it in what we have now. I mean, I think the most obvious oligarchy we have is the military industrial complex. They basically run everything. And right now, if they run our foreign policy, people complain about how, Israel gets $3.8 billion a year from the American taxpayers. Actually, they don't. The military industrial complex gets $3.8 billion a year. They manufacture stuff and then they send it to Israel. That's an oligarchy. An oligarchy is once you get to a certain point under elite theory, you're going to get these people who stand out and they're almost impossible to take down unless, and we may talk about the term, a circulation of elites. So
that's actually was my next question. What is the circulation of elites? So you have these elites who get entranced into power. They're the ones who really care, the ones who really, run everything. How do they go away? Like, do they just pass it on to the next generation? Does this new group come up and take their place? How does that new group take its place? Is it a populist movement? Is it just elites behind the scenes going on? Like, how does the circulation of elites, why does it take place? And why is it always taking place?
One of the reasons why is, like, if you look at Henry Ford was he ran Ford with an iron fist. He created foundations. He was a great man. Well, once he died and his son took over, well, he turns it over to his son. So his son is now an elite businessman, but the son is not the father. And you take it all the way forward to today, where you may have his great grandson running it, and the Ford Foundation donates money to trans issues, donates money to all these things. So basically what happens is you have elites that gain influence, they gain power and influence, and then through either dying and not passing on their influence, dying and passing on their influence to people who are not equipped to be elites. You have people who fall out of the elites, and then other people who are gaining influence, or who, I use the example of like Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater. He was just, people just, he's a war profiteer. All he did was, he was just a mercenary for all these years. And now anyone who's been following him for the last year realizes that the way he's talking and the information he's putting out there is, he believes that the people who are the elites are bad elites. And I believe he's making a play for that. So circulation of elites, I mean, the worst scenario of circulation of elites would be like the French Revolution. They kill all of the elites and then you get new elites. But really, you didn't really have any elites after that, and then you had to have elites step up.
Napoleon.
Yeah, exactly. But what you see is like you can look back and like the Sackler family, who basically got the whole white section, tried to get all of white America hooked on OxyContin. They were elites up until their grift got exposed about 8 years ago. And I'm sure their grift got exposed probably by somebody who was either on the inside or a competitor who didn't like them. And now they're no longer considered to be elites. They don't have a lot of influence, but like the people who put out the Ozempic drugs have influence now. So you see how it is. It's like sometimes you have elites and they're in power and they're influencing power for 20 or 30 years. Then something happens where they just don't have power anymore. They just haven't changed with the times, and someone steps in to fill their spot. Then I'll just put an addendum on this. There's something called the overproduction of elites, and I think that's what we have now. Under fiat currency since 1973, you've just seen the amount of wealth explode, tons of people becoming wealthy. I mean, last time I checked how many millionaires there were in this country, it was like an incredible number. So you have a bunch of people who could be considered to be elites, but there's just too many of them. And when you have too many, you have a tendency, well, from elite theory, too many people are not going to be able to properly run an organization or run a country. Also, you're going to have a degradation of elites. I mean, if you think that we have a problem with young kids not being able to talk to girls, that now people not wanting to leave their house, people just this falling apart of culture of the population when it comes to interpersonal relations, things like that affects them too. So you see people who have power and influence now, but they're like literal morons. So their power and influence just degrades everything and tends to tear everything down.
How much of the degradation of elites has to do with the bioleninism? People like Spangler, not Spangler. Spindle? Is that the guy you talked about? Biolin? Yeah.
Spindle.
How much does bioleninism have to play in this degradation of elites?
Well, definitely in a time like now when it's obvious that these elites are just terrible, that you have people who are just really incompetent at what they do. They're going to have a tendency to want people around them who are more loyal than competent. If they have too many competent people around them, those competent people can step up and take their jobs. Now, I mean, we're not talking about a president. We're not talking about a vice president. We're talking about people in the cabinet. We're talking about the deep state, people like in those entrenched State Department and Pentagon positions who are just going to hire people who don't know who are going to be loyal to them and loyal only. They don't really care whether they can do the job. When Katrina happened, back in, I think it was 2008, one of the big problems when Katrina happened was that the head of FEMA had no history in it, they used to be a caterer. They used to basically run like a catering service. They only got that job out of pure, well, this person, we owe this person a favor, and this person will be loyal to me. So that's the kind of thing. But now you see that everywhere. It's like nobody's competent anymore. I mean, I can't. Half the time you go to a business, you can go to businesses now that it says that they're open and they like close early and they just leave.
Yeah,
it's just people are just everything about the culture, everything about the country is incompetent.
Oh, it's awful. It's everywhere too. Like Taco Bell recently in my town, it's supposed to open up at 6. They've been opening up at 9 because they don't have enough employees to show up on time. It's everything and everywhere. There's a major competency crisis. No one really knows what they're doing anymore.
Yeah, we were driving through Texas back in, this was 2023, like the ending of 2022, and we stopped at a Longhorn Steakhouse off a major highway at 9:00 on a Saturday night, and 1/4 of the restaurant was open because they didn't have employees to do the rest. I mean, this is a Saturday night. Yeah, so yeah.
What role does the managerial class play in this whole degradation of elites and circulation of elites?
Well, the managerial class is basically something that James Burnham saw happening in 1940. He recognized that rather than experts being hired to run this department and run that department, that it seemed more that managers were being hired. So the difference between the difference between an expert and a manager is basically like, say you have a haberdasher,
Mhm.
the person who can actually do the measuring, do the cutting, do the designing. It's the difference between that person and if the haberdasher has a manager who knows none of that running his business.
Hmm.
Okay. So basically what Burnham noticed, and it's pretty obvious now because you can look at people running. Pete Buttigieg is running the Department of Transportation. What does he know about the Department about transportation, except if it's gone up his ass? Um,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he knows about trains. I'm sure he knows
yeah,
about some kind of trains.
yeah. But so what he noticed is that we were getting into managerialism, and he looked at the United States with the New Deal. He looked at the Soviet Union with communism, Bolshevism, and he looked at Germany with with central planning Nazism. And he said, I see the same thing.
Hmm.
He goes, they're all managerial regimes. They're all managing the economy, managing this, managing that, and no one's actually running it. No one's actually making sure. He said, I think he said out of all of those that Germany was doing the best job.
Hmm.
But he also, Germany was winning the war at the time, and he said that they would that they were going to come out on top. But things change.
Yeah.
But yeah, he just noticed that there wasn't governance anymore. Yeah, and then and also FDR. I mean, FDR is the perfect example. He just became like the ultimate manager king.
Mhm.
He like he brought all power unto himself. I think he did. Even in the first two, I know he served for almost 4 terms, but in the first 2 terms, I think he had more executive orders than like 3 times more executive orders than any other president. And he basically had all this power to himself as a manager. And then when he died, he had no one to pass it to. So all that power just went down into the managerial recesses of the system. It went down into, what would become the deep state. And basically, the managerial system is the deep state. It's those people who get government jobs, even important ones, who can't get fired, and all they're doing is managing. All they're doing is making sure they still have a job. All they're doing is making sure that the status quo stays the same. And that's managerialism. It really it's hard for a manager to be considered an elite because most managers have no interest in change. And when you look at most elites, they have interest in change up until the point where they get the kind of change they want, and then they'd like to see things stay the way they are.
Hmm. What about the what is the high, low, and middle? 'Cause I know AA talked about it in his book, but what exactly does it mean when he says the high, low, and middle? I think it was from oh gosh, what's this guy's name? One of the elite theorists. Was it Pareto? Was
So
high, low,
yes,
and middle?
Pareto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is the high, low, and middle?
So it's the obvious thing that you see. So the government managerial class needs you to be dependent upon them. Okay. But the
Mm.
people who tend to be the most non-dependent upon them are the middle class to upper middle class. They know how to make things. They have jobs. They have good jobs. They do not, for the most part, they don't need government handouts. A lot of them just want the government to stay out of their business. Well, in order to, those people are a danger to their power because they don't need them. They can just ignore them. If they decide that they want things a different way, they can actually make it a different way with influence by getting their own elites, things like that.
Mhm.
But what the middle also has is the middle has a tendency to have institutions that make the government obsolete, like churches,
Mhm.
like family, like what we used to have mutual aid societies. We had they have all of these things, civic organizations, all of these things that make the state obsolete. So basically, what the high does, which is the people in charge, is they team up with the low, which are the poor and the people who, in this country, the ones who are like, you enslaved my ancestors for 400 years, or people who just came over the border, people like that, and they empower them against the middle. They suck all of the middle's wealth and give it to the ones on the bottom. And then famously, what you've seen, especially since Biden took office, is that they've basically told the low, if you commit crimes, we're not going to prosecute you, we're not going to punish you, and the middle are the ones with all the money, so go get them. So they've basically, Sam Francis talks about this, he calls it a narco tyranny, where there's liberty for your friends and the law for your enemies. So if we're in the middle, we're the enemy. The ones on the low side, they get to run rampant and do whatever they want, attacking the middle. And if the middle stands up and fights back, well, then the law steps in and says, no, well, you can't do that. So it's always, and there's many ways that the high, how the high and low get together to fight against the middle. But for the sake of simplicity, I think that's a pretty good way of putting it.
It is. So this is, I don't know if it's technically a part of elite theory, but it seems to be brought up a decent amount by people who preach the elite theory. Is it's Machiavelli's foxes and lions has archetypes of different kinds of elites. So what exactly are the foxes and lions, has Machiavelli put it?
So foxes are the kind of people who they do things by cunning. They get their way by cunning. They get laws passed. They lobby. They get regulation passed. They do things like set up the system where the low can attack the middle, and if the middle fights back, they get hurt. The lions are the ones who resort more to force. They'd be like your military kind of people, your martial class, and they're easier to see. When you see a lion, I mean, when you say a lion, if you mention totalitarianism as a lion, people immediately start picking out historical examples of lions. Somebody a lion would be, I mean, I would say a lion right now would be Bukele. Bukele's a lion. He didn't clean up his country through lawfare. He didn't throw the book at people. No. He empowered his military to go in and just arrest anyone who had a neck tattoo or who had a teardrop tattoo or who had a gang tattoo, and anyone who was a friend of theirs. That's lion kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing you see when you have cracking down, when you see, famously like in the 60s when the pictures of, look at them turning fire hoses on black people who were just protesting all peacefully. Yeah, not peacefully. You just got to be on the other end of that. But those would be considered lions. But foxes are the ones who are just very, they want to do things in a clever way to make people believe that they still have that people still have freedom, that people are still autonomous, but they're slowly but surely chipping away at anything that you can do. Whereas a lion would just come in and say, "No, you can't do that," with an iron fist. So, we definitely seem to be have been ruled by foxes more, but every once in a while, foxes also have to exhibit lion behavior.
Are there any historical figures you could think of who kind of exhibited traits of both, like who was a bit of a fox and a lion? Because like just hearing it made me think of like different moments of like Napoleon's life when he was sometimes more fox, sometimes he was more lion. It seems like, so are there historical figures who do both more, or is that kind of a rarity?
Well, I think Alexander the Great's probably a perfect example of it. He would He would definitely show lion behavior to the governments and the armies that he conquered,
Mhm.
but definite fox kind of behavior to the populations that he conquered. He
Hmm.
would, he would have the sword for the armies and for the politicians, but he would have platoons of philosophers for the people that he conquered, so that he can start to get them thinking in a more Hellenic way. So
Hmm.
I think that's a pretty good example of Alexander. I think is a perfect example.
Okay. Um, so we've been talking about elites a whole bunch, and in a democratic society, that's kind of foreign to most people's ears. They think, "Oh no, we run the government. We are the government. We tax ourselves. We do all that kind of. We arrest ourselves. We are the state." What role does like manufacturing consent have to play in this? Like the elites can't just rule by fiat. They have to have some kind of will from the people to support them, and at least an imagined will. So how do they manufacture consent?
Well, elites wouldn't be elites unless they had newspapers, unless they had media outlets. Elites wouldn't be elites if they couldn't manufacture the narrative.
Mm.
I think anyone who lived through 2020, anyone who lived even through 2008 in the housing crisis, it's all about the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You need to put a narrative out there that people either are afraid of, that people are happy with, people are enraged by. The easiest way to control the people, if you're an elite, is to be able to manufacture, using the term manufacturing consent, but you're basically getting people to adopt your narrative.
Mm.
So if the narrative is that Trump colluded with Russia, then that's a narrative that's being constructed for a certain segment of the population who they're trying to mobilize and they're trying to radicalize against other groups. And usually, when you say that, like that Trump Russia narrative, I mean, you're talking about who believed that: the media, academia, housewives. I mean, people who have great influence upon our society. So yeah, I mean, elites cannot stay in power. Elites cannot do their elite thing unless they can control the narrative. And that's where manufacturing consent comes in. That's why having the press and having academia, that's why the march through the institutions was so important.
That's why having a propaganda wing, I guess, is also very important.
Hey, hey, at least there were regimes out there that didn't hide it. They even talked about, their propaganda minister was front and center.
Oh yeah, I've become very. I've been reading Zaki Liu's propaganda again recently. I'm becoming very propaganda pilled. Like the propaganda is probably it's needed in a lot of circumstances, and I think it's good. The only difference between the only time propaganda is bad is when it's bad propaganda. I'm all for propaganda for things I like. Who wouldn't be?
Yeah, I think that I read on the show recently Joseph Goebbels' speech from like 1928. It was called Knowledge and Propaganda. And yeah, he talked about that. He said that propaganda has no morality. Propaganda either works or it doesn't. It's either good or bad propaganda, and good and bad are not moral statements.
Yeah. Let's see here. So I got one more question before we go to the Twitter questions.
Okay.
What role does the so this is more like a general political rule, not necessarily an elite serious thing, but what role does the friend enemy distinction have to play here? Because clearly we need to mark what's our friends, mark with one's our enemies. That seems to be a basic rule of politics people have forgotten. If you can just hear a quick little rundown of the how to spot a friend, how to spot an enemy, and things like that. Because I've got a couple of questions from Twitter that kind of lead into that topic.
Well, I mean, friend enemy is just how Carl Schmitt described politics.
Mm-hmm.
Politics is friend enemy. It's you're either on my side or you're not. I think I've already said it. Liberty for my friends and justice and the law for my enemies. Yeah, politics is war by other means.
Mm-hmm.
And people who believe that politics can be anything other than friend enemy I don't know what they've bought. They've bought some elite came up with some really good propaganda for them. And I mean, if you take away the government, it's going to be friend enemy. You're going to be walking around in a quote unquote anarchist society. I was dealing with an anarchist on Twitter today, so I have this in my head. You're going to be walking around in an anarchist society, and your only question is going to be when you encounter somebody is this my friend or is this my enemy?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing in politics. And politics is about who's your friend, who's your enemy. And another thing that Carl Schmitt, by understanding the friend enemy distinction, you can understand something else that Carl Schmitt said, that politics never stops. It never stops. If you rest, your enemy jumps ahead of you. I mean, just look at whatever republicanism is in this country, the Republican Party. They just stopped, and they it's like after Reagan, they just stopped. They didn't care anymore. It's, I guess, after Nixon, because Nixon gave us this black eye. He wanted to be a ruler. I wish. Yeah, and so it's like they don't even play anymore. And now that they're not playing, they didn't play friend enemy. Now they're talking about playing friend enemy, and let's face it, it may even be too late.
Yeah, bunch of beautiful losers and court jesters.
Yeah, Sam Francis. That's a good term from Sam Francis. Yeah,
he was so great. He's so good. I need to eventually have some people on to cover Beautiful Losers because it's just fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to the Twitter questions here. So let's see what we got from Joshua Ham.
Now I'm scared.
From Joshua Ham. All right, we got a bunch of wannabe edgelord types who believe they are the Nietzschean great man, but the burgeoning counter elite. They're wrong and retarded, but they don't believe. How can we tell the wheat from the chaff? How can we tell the good counter elite that are coming up from the fake counter elite that are coming up?
How can we tell?
Yeah,
well, I mean, it's in their message. I mean, if you have people who are referencing history, but referencing history, ahistorically, that's one way to know. If you have somebody who at this point is saying this is the only way we win, that person's retarded, because most of the people don't even know what fight they're in. Yeah. So I would say anyone who is calm, anyone who is making arguments rationally. Now, everybody likes to shitpost every once in a while, so I know somebody will wait for me to shitpost and say that's not rational. I'm shitposting. Leave me alone. And you're looking for people who are being rational, but who are also who at this point I would say anyone who real counter elites would be anyone who is not talking about how the system as the way it is designed today can be diverted or can be used for that they can take it over. The system that exists today is going to have to be replaced. I'm not saying the state and the structure has to be replaced, but the way it's being run has to be replaced. So if they're not talking about running it another way, and the other way that they're talking about running it doesn't make sense to you, don't take them seriously. I'm sure there may be some people out there right now that I just don't agree with, and maybe their way could work. I've been wrong before, so I'm fine with that.
From Brandon Walsh, a discussion on when populism stops being the loser. At some point, the counter elites need a mob. So where are we at in that process, and when does it begin?
Well, populism doesn't work. Populism can be a weather vane for the elites. If certain elites see that the majority of the people are talking one way and are desiring one thing, that person may, if they're not an elite, they may jump up and try to become an elite. But if they are an elite, they can change their course. Now, I think the greatest way to know populism doesn't work is in 2008 when we were going through the housing crisis. They did polls and 80% of the people did not want the banks to be bailed out. and they bailed them out anyway.
Yeah.
So, the people in charge do not care about the masses. The masses will never be able to organize against 350 people. Will never be able to organize against 2 million people, against 2,000 people. And so populism is. And what AA says in his book, in The Populist Delusion, is that if populism becomes too popular, if too many people embrace it, you could be on the verge of a revolution. And a revolution can actually be a lot worse because you don't know whether you're getting the American or the French.
Yeah.
And either way, people are going to die. But if it's the French, I mean, you're looking at, especially with the example of Bolshevism, I mean, you're looking at humanity ceasing to exist. And when I say that, I don't mean that everybody in the world will be killed. I'm talking about people will become inhuman.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one big thing I've noticed was there's a certain segment of American right-wing people who worship the American Revolution and want another one. And it's like, probably not. The American Revolution was very specific because they want the enemy wasn't on our shores. I mean, they were, but the centralized power of the enemy wasn't on our shores. So there was the barrier of the ocean, and I think that prevented a lot of because when you had the French Revolution, there was one town, there was one country, all right there. There wasn't really pushing them out. There was just getting rid of them.
People who want the American Revolution can end up with the Spanish Civil War instead, and that's you can make the argument that was even worse than the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know nothing about the American Civil War. Spanish Civil War. Spanish Civil War. I know nothing about it.
Once you start going down that rabbit hole, you can't stop. It's the most I just found out about a new book today, and I found it on. I actually found it for under $10 on Amazon, where everywhere else it was like $30 to $40, and I found a PDF of it, and it's just about all the bombing raids on civilians that the communists were doing. And then when the Italians showed up to stop them, they blamed it on the Italians.
Of course.
So, I mean, it's just that war is. I literally cannot. There's a couple books. There's one book that was written by a Catholic that there were times where I had to put it down and cry.
What book is that? Write that down.
It's called The Last Crusade by Carol.
Okay. Because I'm looking for books to listen to on my road trip, and so I'll read along the way. Someone is Last Crusade. Okay. Last question from Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably, I know it's going to be a bad one because it pops up in the probable spam section of the comment section, but let's have some fun with it. From Beavis. I'll explain it to you. It's a bunch of brain-dead Marxist authors doing hardcore commie revisitism to deflect that the Jews are responsible for every single social engineering in the world since Jesus was killed. Dude clowns on lawbirds and eats up elite theory, and it's a gif of a Jewish man laughing with his hands together. Any comments on that insane comment? Or?
I don't know. This comment brought to you by weed?
Probably. Or maybe something else. But it's there's a when I post about elite, every time I post about elite theory, I get a bunch of really brain dead comments from people who just absolutely despise it. Why do you think that is? Like, why is this?
Well, because people don't know what Marxism is. People don't know what National Socialism is. People think it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. They think that they think that the National Socialists in Germany were practicing socialism according to Marx, and I mean that couldn't be further than the truth. No. They think the Nazis were left wing. Okay, well, I mean, you can believe whatever the fuck you want, but it doesn't make it true. I mean, it's just it's uneducated Americans trying to applying late 20th and 21st century and Cold War political theory to American political theory to European. I mean, these are people who don't know anything about the European culture. They don't know anything about post World War One. They don't understand things that Austria and Germany went through from 1919 to 1924, where they basically tried to kill the whole population. They tried to starve the whole population to death. I mean, these are people who they're not serious people. They're not serious thinkers. They've never read Sorel. They've never, it's just
They're stuck in the American bubble,
basically. I mean, when I was an anarcho-capitalist, do you know how many people contacted me and told me the only thing who called themselves also anarcho-capitalists, that the only thing I know about anarcho-capitalism I learned from memes? I mean, think about it. So you have, and the people who are always the most active in online movements are usually younger people.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, millennials don't read. Millennials don't read a lot. The Zoomers I know read, but I mean, there's only certain Zoomers I want around me. But people just don't read. So they're like, oh, that's a socialist. Yeah. And also, North Korea says that they're a republic. Okay. Are they a republic? Okay. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You don't know anything about the interwar period, which is probably the most important period in the history of humanity. The interwar period between World War I and World War II defined where we are right now. It's why we're where we are right now. I mean, obviously, the outcome of World War II was more than anything where we are right now. But I mean, that's what set that whole thing up. The decisions that were made to, basically have a quote unquote civilization where kids are transing themselves, and you have gay pride parades, and you have porn that's free. That was all designed then. A lot of what happened was a reaction to stop that, because there were people who understood that what was happening at that time was going to destroy their civilization. And it did. I mean, Western civilization is destroyed. I know that makes a lot of people happy, especially, fake anarchists who, live at home or pay their taxes, or, talk about how Bitcoin fixes this and they have $50 worth of Bitcoin in their wallet. But I mean, real shit happened, and it was a consequence of things that happened back then. So to just write off, the Spanish Civil War as two totalitarian forces fighting against each other, or Russia against Germany, two totalitarian forces fighting against each other, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Last question, not really related, but I'm curious that you mentioned it. Are you, to use internet slang, white pilled or black pilled about Zoomers? Because I know there's some people in the dissident right or the, also because of the internet, who are very down on Zoomers, and there's some who are, like me, just hoping to Zoomers. What about you? Are you up or down on Zoomers, Pete?
It's, I mean, white pilled on the Zoomers that I know. I mean, it seems like, I was talking to somebody. If I said their name, you'd know. I'm not going to say who they are, though, because I don't have permission. But, their son goes to a boarding school, and he says, these kids aren't sitting around reading, political theory. But he says, when he's around them, they all seem right wing to him. And his son would be like a very, very young Zoomer. I was around a bunch of Zoomers last weekend, and I couldn't be more impressed. But, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. I think elite theory applies everywhere, and you're going to have some elite Zoomers. But for the most part, just like Gen X, you have some elite Gen Xers. For the most part, the boomers. You have some great boomers. For the most part, millennials, same thing.
I'd say great boomers.
What?
Great boomers? Really?
Yeah, there's some great boomers out there. I know. I definitely know a few.
Must be amazing. I don't, but no, yeah, Zoomers are interesting to me because I was talking to some Zuma friends of mine. One of them, just graduated high school, didn't know what World War II was. Had no idea. Just didn't know. Which I thought was insane. But then I got to explain, the Weimar Republic from like E. Michael Jones' point of view about it. There was no pushback. There was no counter propaganda involved there. So I think it is an interesting opportunity for the historically and culturally ignorant Zoomers to be educated without any to be propaganda without any counter propaganda. Just to get more information out there for them wouldn't be that hard, I think.
No. I mean, not understanding the only problem with not understanding, like even knowing anything about World War II, is just that you don't understand why the world is right now, the way it is right now. If you understand World War II, you know why the world is right now, the way it is right now. Now, people want to blame it on the Cold War. It had nothing to do with the Cold War. It had to do with everything with World War II.
Yeah. Well, Pete, we're running up on our time. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you at?
Pete Quiñones Show, all podcatchers. Still on YouTube, demonetized though, of course. Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, and the Old Glory Club, theoldgloryclub.com. Check out our Substack. Old Glory Club put out three Substacks a week. We do Pony Express Radio live stream on Thursday nights, and
great show.
We just had our thank you. Yeah, we just had our first conference this past weekend. It was completely sold out. We're sticking to Dunbar's number when it comes to conferences, but we are building out. We are building out when it comes to forming chapters all over the country, and this isn't a group about we just want liberty. If we can just get liberty. No, this is a group about this is a fraternal organization of serious people who are supporting each other in serious endeavors. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, you should definitely pick up Nemo Parvini's Populist Delusion. It's a very short but fantastic read. Really covers. This is an introduction to that book, pretty much. I mean, just watch this and go into there. This book would do a much better job explaining it. But I think that's it. Podcast will be taking a break for the next few weeks because I drive up to Alaska. Connor and the other guys on the show will probably put out some content soon, and you might get one more episode, but I'm not sure yet before the break. But everyone, like, comment, and subscribe, and thank you for listening. Pete, again, thank you for coming on. Everyone, have a good night.